Thanks for your patience as I was making sure I got the video and all of that working. So welcome back. I hope you're having a good week so far. Today we are picking up where we left off and talking about the new theories discussed for this week. Our last new theory for the week is space negotiation theory, which will be shifting gears a little bit. We've been talking a lot about media, right, in terms of agenda setting theory and the ways in which media has significant power to shape the way that we communicate. But we'll be shifting gears to focus more on culture, right? While we offer a course on intercultural communication, culture is something that I think is really important for us to understand, because if language is the way that we use symbols to communicate and convey reality, then different languages, cultures, customs, and so on drastically change how we interpret, understand material, and so on. So we'll be hearing from Angela in just a bit, who will be sharing things related to face negotiation theory. Just as a reminder, coming up next week, we'll have Jade on communication privacy management, JP and Isaac on groupthink that Wednesday, and then Kendra on the 29th on organizational culture theory. This is also the last theory of the available options that you could choose to use for your first application paper. The rest of the theories we'll be talking about in the class are candidates for that second paper. So last class, we heard from Presley, and we started talking about uses and gratifications theory, or UNG, the idea that we actively and agentically choose media in our own lives. And then also we applied UNG to think about streaming, the way in which there's digital releases and releases in theaters at the same time, and what motivates our decision to go and watch a movie in a theater versus staying home. So as a true-false question, let's do a poll here in just a second. So true or false, uses and gratification is a, quote, mass society theory that suggests that media has significant control or influence over people's lives. Raise your hand if you believe that this is true. This is a mass society theory. False? Yes, so the answer is false, right? This is what's known as a limited effects theory, right? The idea being that a mass society theory, such as agenda setting, suggests that media really has significant roles over our lives. You can almost think about it as like injecting like a needle, right? Media has control and influence. But limited effects suggests that we're the one with power and control, and therefore media is adjusting and modifying what it shows us based on our own interests. So for today, we'll be hearing from Angelin about face negotiation theory, and also understanding the way that it's used to manage reputation, impressions, and so on. So I believe we've got everything set up for you, Angelin. So I will turn things over to you and have you get started on this theory.
So I will be discussing face negotiation theory. So this theory is based on research by Stella Ting-Toomey, and that face negotiation theory is also based on face management, which describes how people from different cultures manage conflict negotiation to maintain face. So face is a claimed source of desired social self-image in a relational or international setting. So like an example of this would be, say, like you and your significant other like broke up, and like your significant other broke up with you and people are asking you about the situation, and you just say that it was mutual to like maintain your face and that the situation was like better than it actually was. So for face, there are two different types. There's positive face and negative face, and positive face is the desire to be liked and admired by others and negative face is the desire to be unconstrained. So this theory looks at how individualistic and collectivist cultures manage conflict to maintain face. So individualistic cultures focus on the individual needs over group needs, while collectivist cultures value working together and viewing themselves as part of a larger group. So an example of this is Survivor. So basically everyone is like on a stranded island and they are first in groups and have to work together to like get through the tasks that they're given. And through this, people are communicating with one another to form alliances, which ultimately helps them get further into the game. So due to the nature of the game, people are most likely to pursue individual goals and interests, and by doing so, they tend to change face depending on the person to build relationships. So I have Tony here. I think it's pretty funny. So during Survivor, he basically lies to everyone, and he does so like based on the person to like maintain a relationship with them. So then there was another like cop friend, and at first he lied, but then to like gain her trust, he then told her that he was also a cop. And so by lying throughout Survivor, he was able to build relationships and alliances with people by maintaining a positive face. So there are different ways, this theory discusses different ways to manage conflict across culture. So first we have avoiding, which is trying to stay away from disagreement and unpleasant exchanges with others. So an example of this is just saying that you're busy instead of actually facing a conflict with the person. And there's dominating, which involves using influence, authority, or expertise to get ideas across. And obliging, which is going along with the suggestions of others to satisfy them. And then here's the. Oh.
You're wrong.
Sorry, that was an accident. Sorry.
You're wrong. A party. What do you say?
Oh, I love parties. That sounds like fun.
You know, parties are fun and it's tempting, but we can't because.
Oh, come on, I insist.
Okay.
So in that video, you can see that Nemo's dad was trying to avoid going with the shark by saying, "Oh no, I can't." And then the shark was dominating, like using his big presence to like try and get Nemo's dad to come with them. And then in the end, Nemo's dad ends up obliging and going along with the shark. And then we have compromising, which is meeting in the middle to resolve an issue. An example of this would be, say you want your curfew to be 12 in the morning, but your parents want you to be back at 10. You would meet in the middle and say that you'll be meeting back at 11 p.m. And then there's integrating. And this style is used by people to find a solution to a problem. And then, so why does this matter? This theory can be applied to many different situations, as well as the way we build relationships. It also explains how we approach conflict in different ways, depending on the person and situation. And from this theory, we can also understand how people change face based on a person that they may be talking to. So an example of that would be, say I'm going for a job interview and I want to maintain a positive face because I would like to get the job. So by doing so, I'd be respectful to the person. And this theory also helps us to understand the different ways other cultures manage conflict to maintain a face.
Awesome job, Angelin. Based on people's reactions, I suspect this is an infamous person from Survivor. A little bit. But some really good use of examples. I like the Finding Nemo example, right? Fish are friends, not food. The sharks who try to reform themselves and present themselves in a different way. Really interesting and thoughtful examples here to help us think about this theory in action. And I think really highlight the opportunities that this theory has to understand our human relationships. So great work here. Also across the board, thank you to to everybody who presented this week and getting us started thinking about and using these theories. So face negotiation theory, or FNT, as Angela brought up, right, is based on this idea of managing face, right? So you've heard the expression saving face, right? Oftentimes it's a way that we manage and deal with our public persona or reputation surrounding other people. This is especially important as we think about culture, right? And the idea that reputation, face, lineage, heritage, and so on can mean very different things depending on the cultural background that people come from. For example, in a lot of collectivist or very family-oriented cultures, there is a much greater focus on the idea that an individual's reputation is implicated by their relationship to a family. For instance, in many countries such as Japan, right, the usage of, rather than last name, family name is used. And this idea that family background plays a really big role in shaping how we manage reputation too. That when we think about reputation, face, and how we're perceived by other people, it's more than just a reflection of ourselves, right? If you ever were at like a conference, like a parent-teacher conference, right, and your family is there and wants to hear about how you've been doing in your classes, right? Oftentimes the parents or guardians are the people themselves that are anxious or worried about how their kid is doing because they want to make sure that that's reflective positively on them as parents too, right? So this is a good theory in thinking about culture and managing reputation. It's socio-psychological, again, looking at our human cognition, positivistic and empirical, but again, is taking that cultural approach. There was a 2004 film called Saving Face. I'm going to show a trailer of it in just a little bit, but it's an interesting, very fitting title-wise, but also content-wise, it's interesting in FNT in action. The film is about a mother-daughter pair, and the mother is having a child, but doesn't really want to tell her daughter that she's pregnant. And the daughter, right, is coming out as queer and sharing that experience. And they're both wanting to tell each other, but they're also both uncomfortable telling each other because of the cultural expectations and norms. So they're both trying to manage a reputation or face or public persona with each other that's based on kind of restraining and holding back certain parts of their own lives. So this comes from Dr. Stelting Toomey, who's a professor of speech communication at California State University, Fullerton. And again, is really interested in the ways that we communicate about culture, reputation, and identity. So as mentioned, right, this idea of saving face, if you have heard this term used before, or keeping a good face, you can think about it as, for instance, you're at a restaurant and suddenly you spill something on your shirt, right? And if you were to spill something or stain your clothes, there's a few things that you might try to do, right? You might try to preserve your reputation and say, I don't normally do this, right? I'm normally not that clumsy, or, how embarrassing, right? You might say something like that. We also are concerned with the idea of being well regarded, right? So, for instance, a lot of people, when they're preparing for and applying for jobs, will do things like update a profile for a site like LinkedIn, or update something like a resume to ensure that they convey a good reputation. And also a question of how people deal with bad situations. So you spill something on your shirt, what do? There's a good chance you'll likely go to the restroom to try to clean that up. Or if you have a change of clothes, right, you'll probably put that on, depending on the circumstance as well. So there's a lot of things that we do to manage and deal with reputation. So face negotiation theory brings with it a few different assumptions about how we choose to convey our reputation with other people. One of the core ideas here is that self-identity is important in interpersonal interactions, right? That how we choose to understand ourselves as human beings and convey that understanding to other people is a big element of our communication. That is, how we negotiate and convey our identity differs a lot depending on culture and situation. For instance, right, how openly do you talk to members of your family on your personal life, on social or political issues, and so on, is an example of the ways in which we manage face differently. What we choose to talk about with somebody like a grandparent or older relative might be very different than how we choose to speak to a close friend. The idea of how we manage conflict is mediated by face and culture. For instance, do we choose to directly confront or debate or argue with people with whom we disagree? Or as Angelin was talking about, right, do we kind of avoid or pretend the conflict doesn't happen? That's a big element of empathy. And then this idea that certain actions can pose a threat to our face or self-image. So again, if you have something spilled on your shirt and you're suddenly really embarrassed, right? Or if you've watched like in just about every rom-com, for whatever reason, the like female lead is always clumsy, is always tripping over things. It's like a weird trope in just about every rom-com, right? That character oftentimes is constantly apologizing for that projected image of how other people see them as clumsy. So this idea of face, right? You could think about it as kind of like a face that you wear or a mask or a persona that you put on and then take off at the end of the day. You're kind of like hanging it up with your coat once you're done. And this idea that face and reputation and identity exist across a variety of cultures is important. That regardless of the culture, there are different versions or components of ourselves that we choose to highlight. Face is an extension of self-concept, how we view ourselves in relationship to other people. For instance, you might find that with one close friend or family member, you tend to really like to talk about dogs. And in another, you tend to talk about a lot of personal and mental health related issues. In other words, face is about our desired self-image. You might think that back to social information processing theory and the idea of an ought self. Who do we want to be? Who do we wish that we were? And how do we kind of fake that until we make it? So face is an important idea here in understanding and sort of pulling apart everything here. Additionally, there's a lot of different elements that sort of make up what a face or desired self-image is and looks like. One of them is an idea of face concern, whether or not we want attention drawn to ourselves or whether or not we want to stand out in the crowd, right? In a lot of collectivist cultures, there is a much greater desire to blend into the group and to not stand out in a negative way, right? Oftentimes when there's higher population, when people are not interested in rocking the boat, or maybe people are more introverted, right? They don't want a ton of focus being given to themselves, although in more individualistic cultures, we might desire that a little bit more. Face need refers to this idea of dealing with inclusion or autonomy, right? So that's this kind of spectrum that we see in managing face. Either we want to be a part of the group and really represent within that group, or we want to be seen as our own person, right? And stand out on that basis. So depending on how we choose to relate to other people, we might try to meet those different areas. One example includes the way in which advertisements are given to members of more individualistic cultures versus more collectivist cultures. For instance, an advertisement for a golf club might include a single person in the United States who's doing a shot and the shot goes really well and hooray for them, right? Whereas in more collectivist cultures, companies advertising golf clubs, they'll typically have a team of golfers who are like high-fiving or laughing or spending time together to emphasize the social element and the idea that if you buy these golf clubs, then you can work together and have a good time with other people. So positive face refers to this desire to move toward inclusion, to be liked, part of the group, to blend in, whereas negative face does not mean like bad reputation. In this case, negative face means that you have a desire to be autonomous and to stand up, right? As we manage conflict, oftentimes negative face means that we're targeted or blamed or really focused on as a source of the conflict. So our desire to blend in and not really be a key actor in the conflict is the big motivator in this one. Additionally, there is this idea of face work, right? And face work involves the strategies and practices that we use in order to manage our and keep our face with other people, right? If you think about, for instance, this idea that our persona has to be constantly managed, a theory like social information processing would tell us that we manage our face through updating our online profiles, through doing something like a Google search and seeing what comes up, and so on, right? So face work means that we use communication to make sure that the face and version of ourselves that we want to share with other people is consistent. Some of the ways that we do this involve tact, right? So tact involves respecting the autonomy and concerns that another person might have. You might be familiar with the phrase of being tactful, right? If somebody is tactful, they're typically sensitive. They typically avoid asking questions that might be considered inappropriate to the context. So that's one element. Another idea here is solidarity, right? Solidarity gets used when we talk a lot about social change and related topics. Actually, I've got it on the books to teach a course next year, if you're around, called Communication for Social Change, which we'll get into these topics a little bit more. But solidarity, right, refers to being a member of the group and helping other people to be members of that group too, right? Saying, I stand in solidarity means I support the needs or concerns that people are raising. For instance, if you're somebody who was targeted by a racial slur, right? You and other members of the group might share and provide support on dealing with that experience. Approbation is also a way that we manage face and reputation. We don't like it when things get awkward, right? Oftentimes, if we have an awkward interaction with other people and we feel uncomfortable, we do things to try to mitigate that and help the other person feel more comfortable. For instance, maybe somebody has spilled food on their shirt, right? And they're feeling really awkward and uncomfortable. You might say, hey, it's not a big deal. I do it all the time, right? In an effort to minimize the blame and targeting that they might feel because they're standing out, they have this big spill, and maximizing praise, helping people to feel good about the fact that they're not alone in spilling something on their shirt. Additionally, this idea of face work, managing our face and the way that we present ourselves to others ties pretty closely to our identity too, right? For instance, people with disabilities, including sort of in a lot of circles related to autistic self-advocacy, have talked about the challenges of masking, right? The idea that you're presenting a mask or a sort of different version of yourself that you don't necessarily see as similar to how you might regularly behave. So one of the challenges then becomes the idea that sort of a mask risks overtaking you or not feeling like it's an authentic reflection of who you are, right? If you want a very literal example of that metaphor, the Jim Carrey film, The Mask, is an example of this like very different persona taking over somebody's identity, right? Self-identity is complex. It involves a lot of different elements and components that make us who we are, right? Our personality, how we choose our activities, and our social networks, our goals, and so on. You might think back to social penetration theory, the idea that we have these different layers of ourselves that we choose to share. There's a lot going on there, right? And a lot that people are not going to gather when they meet you for the first time. So we negotiate these identities through our self-image or face. And then the efforts that we take can be both preventative and preservation focused. So as an example, right, of face saving or preventative measures, maybe before you eat at a restaurant, you decide that you're going to, put the little napkin in your lap. That way food does not drop onto your legs, it drops onto the napkin instead, right? And you do that as a way of trying to prevent something from happening. Or face preservation, you spilled the food and you decide to go to the restroom, apologize, and so on that happens, right? So oftentimes we're looking for patterns and we'll predict ways to make our experience go a little bit more smoothly if something that might be embarrassing or cause conflict occurs. So this theory really gets at different strategies for managing and dealing with conflict, right? We offer conflict management as a course at EOU. Conflict management, right, deals with the idea that conflict is not an inherently bad thing. In fact, conflict can be a force for good if it means that people are openly able to share and express their perspectives, right? The idea of conflict is that inevitably there is going to be a disconnect in terms of goals, motivations, limited resources, and so on, right? If you and a friend both really want the same job, and while you support each other, there's going to be some element of conflict over who gets that job, right? So one way to manage conflict that is very kind of conflict doesn't exist. Sometimes that can be useful in smaller scale conflicts because it prevents an escalation, but it also means sometimes avoiding can cause things to bubble up later and resentments to build like a volcano, right? Obliging is essentially giving into the demands or needs of the other person, right? We oblige the other person and say, you know what, you can choose what to watch tonight because I've done it before and it's your turn, right? We oblige when we don't necessarily see it as a big of a deal to win an argument, but we see it as important to the other person. Compromise, everybody hates it, but it can sometimes be the best option, right? Compromise is meeting in the middle. It's the idea of finding this halfway point, perhaps through a third party. Dominating is sort of you getting what you want, right? And the outcome going to your favor at the expense of somebody else. And integrating is the challenging one. Integrating is an idea that we're able to use both the suggestions of each side in order to reach a solution that benefits both people. One analogy that I like is two siblings who both really want a single orange, right? They only have one orange in the house and both of them want it, right? And you think about this as a conflict. You say they both want the orange, one person has to have the orange. What are we going to do? But then as the two siblings begin to talk and figure out and learn why they want the orange, we learn that one of them wants the inside of the orange in order to make a juice, and that the other sibling wants the orange in order to use the peel and make like a candied orange peel. So they realize they can use the same orange together, right? They've integrated both of their concerns effectively. Doesn't work in every situation, but that strategy can be a useful way of managing conflict, and you figure out a way to fully resolve what both people want. So as mentioned, right, there is sort of a spectrum of cultures and how cultures might choose to approach and engage with conflict. And this culture runs the spectrum from individualistic to collectivist, right? Countries such as, surprisingly, Australia is the highest ranked individualistic culture, right? And countries like the United States also rank very highly on individualism. Collectivist cultures might include cultures Central and South America and Africa, as well as areas including many sections of Asia, right? And collectivist cultures tend to emphasize greater collaboration. Population size is one big element of that, but also the idea that depending on the culture, different traditions, homogeneity among things like race and ethnicity also may play a role, right? What has been sort of found statistically is that in more collectivist cultures, there is a greater emphasis on the needs of others, right? Other-face culture tends to be higher, and you're more concerned of how our reputation is managed in proximity to other people. So this theory, right, in terms of how we negotiate and manage our identity, especially as it comes up in conflict, has some critique. One of the critiques is that the sort of delineation or spectrum from individualistic to collectivist culture isn't so easy or cut and dried. Therefore, members of a culture might react differently than we might expect. So for instance, right, in individualistic cultures, if we're part of a collaborative team or group, we might be really concerned with fitting in and supporting the needs of the group. We're not necessarily going to be less concerned with reputation. Similarly, in some more collectivist cultures, right, individuals within those cultures might be more individually motivated or selfish, right? So that spectrum doesn't always correlate to how people manage reputation and conflict. There are also other issues that relate to how we manage reputation or face. One of the biggest ones is power, right? That perhaps we have a much greater desire to maintain professionalism or to present a different version of ourselves with a supervisor versus with a coworker, right? So there's other elements at play that shape our reputation and how we manage that reputation. And also that our measures and efforts to save face and manage reputation are not always the easiest to measure, right? Sometimes figuring out what people choose to do just on the basis of what they consider to be polite or acceptable in a culture versus what people do in order to preserve their reputation aren't super cut and dry. So I would say this is a really good theory if you're looking at how, for instance, in something like media, like a TV episode or film, like we saw in the Finding Nemo example, right? People are managing their reputation. We are reformed, right? We don't try to eat fish. Don't worry about us, right? Or also in terms of public speeches or media, the ways in which people choose to manage and portray themselves to others. For instance, somebody who's giving a speech addressed to the nation is probably going to show a reputation that correlates well to the issues or topics that people see as important, right? For instance, many candidates will portray themselves as being tough on crime, and that method of showing that position on that issue is represented through face or reputation. So I want to show a trailer from this 2004 film. Again, I think it's interesting because you have this mother-daughter duo who each have a secret and are trying to maintain a positive relationship with each other, and also considering factors like culture as they're dealing with and trying to disclose or not disclose this challenge, right? The idea that there's an incongruity between who somebody is in culture, right, and who people are sort of told that they should be. In fact, there are oftentimes disconnects that happen, right? And what you want to be is not necessarily what's accepted or wanted by people that might be in your family or friend circle, right? This idea, how do people manage their reputation or save face in those circumstances becomes a sort of major focus of this.
How come you did me? I was 8, you were 9. The long boys were taunting me. You beat the heck out of them.
Will has a surprise for her mother.
You talk to your mother about us? Does she know we have sex? No, Will, she thinks we conjugate Latin verbs.
Her mother
So we don't catch cookies, you're
is not listening
Seriously, well, why don't you just tell her?
She knows.
She kept saying you know Bukas.
Oh, I'm sorry.
because she has a surprise
Mom? What are you doing here?
of her own.
Baby. Who's the mother? She won't say. Like to meet her. You don't know my mom. Exactly. 你有没有男朋友啊? Do you know what kind of karmic hell I have to pay as a Chinese daughter being taken from her own mom?
Marry her own. What about Mr. Park over at Sterling Hill?
My landlord's a Chinese guy. He's not very chatty, but he's rich.
Book him, Dana.
Now mother and daughter
你什么时候回来?
will face their fears
Kiss me. Right here in front of all of these people.
and find a way to find each other. Joan Chen,
喂，如果你相信你是我做嘴唇，
Michelle Kruzik,
妈，怎么了 ？You're beautiful.
saving
So I think like movies from this era, like late 90s, 2000s, have like the exact same 2 or 3 like narrator voices that they use like every one of these. Anyway, so an interesting example here, right, of how both sort of Chinese American women are negotiating things like culture and expectation, sort of desire for tradition, the sort of compulsory heteronormativity of you have a boyfriend, right? And the awkwardness that happens in that, and the challenge of finding a way to speak about and be honest with each other about some of the things that might come up in each other's lives that lead to very different experiences, right? So an example of this theory in action and the ways that we negotiate identity related to other people. So I want to shift gears a little bit because I know that we are coming up fairly close to the first application paper. It'll be due 2 weeks from Sunday. So I do want to give you the chance to really start to think about and plan for this assignment if you don't already have an idea of where to go from here. And what I want you to do is to take some time to think about some ideas for potential communication artifacts that might come to mind. We've been talking in this class about artifacts to be used for this assignment. And those are things we've seen in the examples shared through discussion leading and for each of these theories, such as films, episodes of a show, a stage production, a song, a speech or public address, advertisements, and anything else that you consider to be a defined form of communication that you could choose to analyze and explore, right? The clearer and more tangible the thing is that you're analyzing, the better. You might think about things that you have watched or seen or explored recently that you think are especially interesting, or maybe there was something that flashed in your head when we talked about one of the theories in the class, or maybe there's something that's just standing out to you as something you'd like to learn or explore in a little bit more detail. So those are some options for what you could do there. And then once you've started to brainstorm and taken some time to think about some examples here, I want you to think about some theories from the course that we've talked about so far that you think are especially standout, that you like, that you enjoy, that you understand, or that you're interested in using, and how you might incorporate one of those theories to analyze a possible artifact. So I'll give you some time to start to explore and think about some ideas. So take another minute or two to brainstorm here. And once you feel good about some of the ideas that you've started to jot down, I'd just like you to find a partner or potentially a group of 3 to chat with about some of the ideas that you have. And as you're listening to each other share, you might offer some feedback about your ideas, which stand out to you as especially interesting, or how people might choose to approach those topics as well. So feel free to share and take the chance to offer some feedback.
I would like to Take another minute or so to share.
Yeah.
Yeah. Persona 5 is one of my favorite.
Oh, it's my favorite. It's like, I didn't want to know that much.
Yeah.
Because.
Yeah. But yeah, games are examples of other things to look at too. I actually saw, I was at a conference where they did a presentation on the video game Celeste and representations of mental health. Yeah, so there's a lot of cool stuff there too. All right. So it sounds like the groups have had a chance to share some of the ideas. Again, it's okay if you don't have a fully formed idea yet. You're continuing to think about ones that stand out to you. I'll give you some more time in classes to start to brainstorm and think about that. Again, it'll be 2 weeks from Sunday, so it's a good opportunity to continue to think about this and ways to apply and use some of these theories. Thank you all for your work today and thinking about and starting to look at this essay. So we talked about face negotiation theory for today, how we deal with and relate our identity to our reputation, and also how we think about culture, right? How we communicate about and discuss culture in social situations. Next Monday, we will talk about communication and privacy management theory. We'll talk a little bit about Spider-Man and about the way in which we manage our reputation and privacy with other people. So please pass forward or email your attendance for today. Have an awesome weekend, and I'll see you again next week.